All right, Amber and Kyle, you guys ready to continue on with the presentation?
Hearing Officer Balmer, yes, we are.
Oh.
Okay. Ready?
Correct.
Hearing Officer Balmer, we were picking up on item 5 when starting to move into the primary rule change key points. And we'll start with the self-bond piece. The proposed rules and regulations better protect Wyoming in today's marketplace. The self-bonding changes have 5 principal components. A move away from the annual audited balance sheet ratios to third-party independent credit ratings. The credit rating serves several purposes. 1, it provides a more real-time picture of the company's financial health. 2, it serves as a third-party independent review of the company's risk that is market sector and energy sector specific. 3, it is an unbiased assessment on a company's financial and market-based financial health. B, it provides a maximum cap or 3 tiers on self-bonding eligibility to ensure adequate cash reserves on hand in the event of a forfeiture. These reserves are for the prevention of deterioration of on-site physical assets such as buildings, rail spurs, physical assets that may have future value, re-engineering of the reclamation plan, and contract letting while the state is pursuing forfeiture proceedings. This improves the timeliness of reclamation and reduces the impacts of inflation and erosion of capital from time value of money to the state. It also adds diversification of the financial assurance portfolio. Rather than 100% bond, it gives you another cash piece to work from. C, the creation of the 3 self-bonding tiers. 75% is the maximum with a rating of AA3 or AA- and higher. 70% maximum with a rating of A2 or A to the 75% tier minimum requirement, and a 50% maximum with a rating of BAA2 or triple B to the 70% minimum requirement. The tiers were chosen on a risk-based assessment. Simply stated, the higher the risk and exposure a company has, the less self-bond the company would qualify for. This risk-based approach provides the state the ability to manage acceptable financial risk while keeping self-bonding as a viable financial instrument now and into the future. I will also note that the 75% the 75% top tier was added following public comment from the March and meeting that we were sent back to re-review the rules. D, the elimination of subsidiary self-bonding and the transition to self-bonding at the ultimate parent entity. And then E, the eligibility for self-bond ends when the mine has a 5-year life of mine left. Thus, a transition to a more liquid financial assurance instrument when the site is no longer generating revenue. And as an additional note, this was changed from a 10-year to a 5-year, or provided companies more time based on public comment. Secondly, the addition of the real property as an independent instrument, as previously stated, this required the legislative change that was completed in 2018. There's another revision here, and that revision was also made to remove personal property collateral, as the agency has found through extensive experience that the application of this instrument is expensive and requires both a high level of oversight on both the operator and the state. In summary, for the same expenditure of financial and labor resources, better financial assurance options are available in the marketplace today. C, standby letters of credit were removed from the financial assurance list, as these letters are unfunded until drawn. D, the addition of a trust option for government securities was included. This allows a method for the agency to accept government securities that are issued on the digital exchange. as this modern practice does not allow a way for the state to be placed on the face of the digital security. And in this additional note here, this was also a section that was added based on public comment. The rules incorporate an 18-month transition period for compliance with the new regulations as well. So we're not asking for them to do it tomorrow. We recognize that based on the size of the liabilities that this will take a little time to make that transition. And with that, hearing officer, I will close the overall general summary, and I would like to move into and address the individual letters and key points out of the letters that we received prior to this hearing.
Members, any questions at this stage for Mr. Lindley? Mr. Bagley?
No questions.
Tim?
Yeah, I think you called on me. A couple. Sometimes it's hard to keep up on the phone, so I hope I got this right. But as I understand it, you're going to change that from a self-bond to something else within 5 years of the life of the mine. Did I get that right?
Hearing Officer Baumer and Council Member Flitner, that is correct. When you get to 5 years, the self-bond must be substituted with something more liquid, because at that point in time, the mine is generally not generating significant revenue anymore, and the liability or the reclamation liability and associated risk goes up. So we're asking to move to a more liquid asset.
Concern would be, is 5 years enough time for them to come up with something that liquid? I mean, you know, some of these mines are pretty big and the bonds are pretty large, and I just worry that 5 years could possibly be too late. I mean, those mines could be in financial straits. You've only got 5 years to transfer it, and it isn't going to happen. And I was wondering if maybe 7 or something wouldn't be a better number there. The other I have, I'll go ahead and ask my other one, then I'll get off because this is kind of cumbersome. But the other one is more of a broad question. Do you feel like the DEQ's current rules give the DEQ enough flexibility to move bonding around from different mines or different enterprises within a company who has multiple bonds with the DEQ? Do they currently have enough flexibility to work with operators to do that? Because we've run into that in the past where they were kind of reluctant to move some of those bonds, but that seems to be kind of a common sense solution in some cases to satisfy both parties. And it hasn't always been done that way. So that's all I've got.
Hearing Officer Baumer, Council Member Flitner, the original proposal was 10 years. In response to your first question, we modified that based on comment we received from the industry and public to 5 years between the two March and September advisory board meetings. We are not hard set on a number, other than we feel that at 5 years, that is probably the minimum. And then in response to your second question, I hope I understand it correctly, but the rules provide for substitution, and they provide for substitution with a variety of instruments, be it cash, letter of credit, surety, or in this case with a larger operation, a self-bond. And there are transition times and periods that the agency would like to see those transitions of those instruments made. We recognize, and that's why we're providing the 18-month transition period here, that when we're capping the self-bond at 75%, let's say for an A-rated company, they're going to have to go out and look for that 25% in the open market in an alternative instrument, and we want to make sure we provide time for that to happen.
Okay, thanks.
Shane, any questions?
No.
Dr. Bagley, any questions?
I think you were asking me if I have any questions. The answer is no.
Okay.
Deb, you're a little quiet.
Okay. Joe's gonna fix that.
Tim's question. Is there a current requirement for changing to a liquid bond?
Hearing Officer Balmer and Chairman Lawley, excuse me, Chairwoman Lawley, no, there is not. This is a new change in the rules.
Next part.
Okay. At this point, we'll go through the comments received for this hearing. We had general comments. We received 13 letters that were pretty much one paragraph statements or less. And we summarized those into, we had 10 responses generally supporting the proposed rule revisions. We had 3 responses supporting the elimination of self-bonding. That's what we received. We received a letter from Western Fuels, and we wanted to address a few of their key points specifically. The comment concerned, their first one, was that business entities may not have a single ultimate parent, and therefore an operation may not qualify for self-bonding. The land quality response is the proposed definition by Western Fuels creates a more complicated system and set of requirements. If companies have ultimate parents, that's plural, some or all can be used under land quality's proposed definition. Split ownership occurs, and the rules provide for each entity to bond for their share at the parent level. This is not uncommon today or into the future. The second comment from Western Fuels, comment concern, was that proposed Chapter 11, Section 4AIF requires both the operator and ultimate parent entity to have long-term credit rating for all bond issuance actions, suggest and be replaced by or in the alternative to remove the requirement that the operator have a credit rating. Both the operator, the land quality response to this is both the operator and ultimate parent need to be financially solvent. This is consistent with CFR 3800 and SMACRA that states a self-bond program is to recognize that there are companies sound enough that the probability of bankruptcy is, and I quote, small. The proposed rule as drafted accomplishes this requirement. The third comment from Western Fuels suggests that a senior secured rating should be used as a benchmark since all 3 rating agencies publish that particular rating as a matter of consistency. And Hearing Officer Balmer, I would like to have Kimber read this response as she's a little more eloquent with this language than I am.
Thank you. This one gets a bit technical, so I will speak to it at a high level, and if anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer those afterwards. So the proposed rule requires that the bond issuance rating and the long-term credit rating comply with the requirements. Credit ratings are used by investors as indications of the likelihood of receiving the money owed to them in accordance with the terms on which they invested. The bond issuance rating measures the ability of an entity to meet financial commitments of the bond issuances that have already been issued. Thus, it is assigned risk of recovery to the bond issuances in the past. The long-term issuer rating, or issuer rating, is the credit rating of a company should it make an issuance today. All of the major rating services offer these ratings. The proposed rules look at the financial strength of a company on the debt owed, in addition to the present credit worthiness towards any new debt issuances it may seek. The Land Quality Division is not prescribing which of the major rating services to be used, and it is not saying to use multiple credit rating services. This discretion is left to the company applying for self-bond. And I'll turn it back over to Kyle for the other issues, unless there's questions.
Are we good?
Were you through with that part of your presentation?
No, there's some technical issues there. I wanted to make sure that the council had an opportunity to ask our expert on those.
Let you finish this portion.
Okay. The fourth item that Western Fuels brought forward suggests that new tiers should be considered because the current proposed tiers are too conservative and cites one-year global corporate default rates by rating modifier as evidence. The land quality response to this is the land quality chose the bottom cutoff as investment grade. Two items to consider, as stated earlier, are that self-bonding is for those companies with superior solvency and the probability of bankruptcy is, again, I quote, small. DEQ's experience has shown that after shedding debt through Chapter 11 process, companies may still not qualify for an investment credit rating. Land Quality believes this supports the rules as drafted. Land Quality experience has shown that for a company to move from below an investment grade credit rating to a Chapter 11 filing is swift and can be very sudden with little or no warning. The terms investment grade and non-investment or speculative grade are market conventions. By definition, investment grade categories indicate relatively low to moderate risk, while ratings in the speculative categories either signal a higher level of risk or that a default has already occurred. In addition, Land Quality has found that the substitution of the self-bond becomes more difficult as the credit rating falls below investment grade. The result is that substitution is or can become hindered once the Chapter 11 filing is made, and when the credit rating falls below investment grade. It is also important to consider that Wyoming has a different level of risk because of the size and scale of some of the mining operations, and the larger reclamation liability that is associated with that size and scale. There is a point when the risk is too high to adequately protect Wyoming's interest in securing final reclamation, and substitution of another financial instrument should take place. The proposed rules ensure reclamation and make certain that Wyoming is in the best position to be first in line in the event of a forfeiture, which is the fundamental purpose for the reclamation bond. We'll move now to the Thunder Basin Coal Company comments. Their first comment and concern is the rules as proposed effectively remove the option of self-bonding for a majority of Wyoming mining companies due to the inability to meet the minimum credit rating and may create competitive disadvantage for Wyoming operations in national and international markets. The land quality response is currently we have 23 self-bonds that total approximately $400 million. The state is required to adequately protect its financial interests against default and ensure timely reclamation. Proposed rules meet both goals while still allowing self-bonding, but those companies with superior solvency and a small risk of bankruptcy. The state is willing to provide a self-bond option for those companies is willing to provide a self-bond option. For those companies that cannot meet the requirements, there are several other financial instruments available in the marketplace today. The second question, this will be in two parts. I'll respond to part of it. Again, I'm going to have Kimber help me with a more technical piece. Thunder Basin Coal Company states that self-bonding will no longer be a viable option for financially healthy mining companies. The land quality first portion of the land quality response is, as stated previously, self-bonding is an acceptable option for those companies with superior solvency and a small risk of bankruptcy. Experience with recent Chapter 11 proceedings has shown that on-balance sheet ratios have a lag time because of the need to use annual audited financials. In the Chapter 11 filing study, the state found itself in a position between secured and unsecured. This resulted in the need to negotiate a bridge in the form of a stipulation order of reduced funding to the state during the Chapter 11 process. This is a position Wyoming cannot find itself in moving forward, and especially with some of the size and scale of the liabilities. This is why the proposed revisions to the rules address the risk using an independent third-party verification in the form of a credit rating. Kimber, if you would, I'm going to have you speak to the second part of that.
Sure, Kyle, thanks. In addition, there are degrees of financial health that are measured by credit rating agencies. Wyoming is willing to take on a certain degree of risk that is proposed in these rules. Risk beyond that stated in the proposed rules should not be on the state. It should be put on financial institutions. Experience with recent chapter 11 filings showed the actual risk associated with self-bonding in its current regulatory form. There is a level of risk for large obligations that is better covered by using instruments offered by banks or sureties. These entities' main business is daily assessing of its customers' risks and charging them a fee according to that risk. The added risk is borne by the operator, and the added risk to the interests of the state is mitigated by having a third party in place should a default occur. Back to you, Kyle.
Okay, and hearing officer, with that, we'll move to the Wyoming Mining Association comments. Their first comment and concern: the current proposed definition of ultimate parent entity is too restrictive and does not recognize subsidiaries with strong financials or companies with multiple parents. Also suggested that the proposed Chapter 11, Section 4AIF should be revised to remove the word and replace it with or, as discussed in the Western Fuels Association comments above. We believe this was already addressed in the Western Fuels comment. The second item for the WMA was supports capping the self-bonding to 75% because it meets some of the land quality stated goals of the proposed revisions, but states that current self-bonding companies be grandfathered in at a current percentage until some trigger is reached. Otherwise, it may constitute a taking. The land quality response to this is the land quality thanks the Wyoming Mining Association for their support in capping the self-bonding at 75%. There are degrees of financial health, and the state is willing to bear a certain degree of risk. However, there is a limit to that risk that cannot be grandfathered, as the comment suggests. When the acceptable level of risk is surpassed, substitution must take place to adequately protect Wyoming's interests. Further, self-bonding should not be misconstrued as a right. SMACRA does not require a state to make available self-bonding for coal operations. It merely lists it as an option in 30 CFR 800. Further, as previously stated, this is clarified farther in Wyoming Statute 3511-417D, where the council may promulgate the rules. The administrator and director may accept the bond. With the financial health of mining, there should be no difficulty complying with the proposed rules should they be approved. However, in an effort to make the change gradual for those using self-bonding, the proposed rules allow the 18-month transition period to come into compliance with the new regulations. The third comment by WMA states that they can support a credit ratings concept for establishing eligibility for self-bonding, but not at the levels or tiers proposed. The land quality response is there are degrees again of financial health that the state is willing to bear a certain degree of risk. However, when the acceptable level of risk is surpassed, substitution must take place to adequately protect the state and ensure reclamation. The Land Quality Division disagrees with the WMA claim that the proposed rules are too restrictive and take into account greater risks than necessary because the proposed rules limit risk in other ways. The goal of financial assurance is to ensure timely final reclamation, and the proposed rules support that goal in a way that is protective of the interests of the state. A simplified example of the risk involved would be to compare the state to a bank. The client is seeking an unsecured financing for 100% of a project while holding a credit rating of 500 or less, similar to the banks being protective of their interests. With the implementation of the proposed rules, Wyoming is being protective of its interests. Fourth comment concern, WMA stated that the proposed rule is not yet ready for promulgation. Land Quality's response to this is, the rules have been extensively vetted as noted previously in the presentation, and portions of industry's comments were included in the regulations prior to the September 2018 Land Quality Advisory Board meeting. The key changes include the addition of the 75% tier, the extension of the substitution period to 5 years of mine life in place of 10, and the addition of the trust option for government securities. We now move to the Powder River Energy Corporation comments. They had one comment, and the comment concerned that even coal mines with excellent financial qualifications will only qualify for partial self-bonding under the proposed rules. Concern about the impact to rural electricity rates and an impact to consumers was raised. The Land Quality response to this is, the Land Quality has concluded that the maximum amount of self-bonding will be limited to 75% of the bonding obligation to include a level of liquidity and diversification to the bonding portfolio to mitigate risk. As noted above, Powder River Energy, as part of Western Fuels, is a company that maintains a cash accrual account based on a cost per ton. Proposed rules as written allow the company to pledge those reclamation assets for the portion of the bond above the 25% or above the cap at 25%, provided the account has not been collateralized for other reasons. In this case, it is difficult for DEQ to see how the use of this account would add cost to the cooperative members. The last letter we received was from the Powder River Basin Resource Council. They are generally in support of the rules. They raised several points that I believe we've already covered. In summary, the goal of the proposed regulations has been and remains to have a reasonable risk-based approach that protects the reclamation interests of the state of Wyoming. They have been drafted to ensure successful and timely reclamation at the closure of a mine, while at the same time minimizing the economic impacts to the extent possible for the mining industry. The EQ has taken 50 months to develop and publish the proposed rule package that is before the council today. Land Quality has invested the necessary time to provide opportunities for industry and the public to provide input and guide the process, as this is definitely a complex set of regulations. DEQ has reviewed and considered all comments made by stakeholders. Land Quality has made every effort to do its due diligence in developing the proposed rules and believes that the rules as proposed strike the appropriate balance between the interests of the state, the industry, and the public. And with that, Hearings Officer Balmer, Land Quality is asking for approval of the rule package and an associated statement of reasons for Chapter 11, 20 in coal, and Chapter 6 and 12 in non-coal. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll open up questioning to members of the council at this time. I can start with you, Shane.
I don't have questions right now.
Okay. Tim, do you have any questions?
This pretty much across the board. I think there's been a need for this kind of thing for
Tim,
a while.
Tim, I'm sorry, you're going to have to start over. You
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better. Thanks.
Is that better?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, I think the DEQ is pretty much on the right side of this across the board. It all sounds reasonable to me, and I think it's been needed for a while. I do still have a concern about the 5-year period. The DEQ started out down that road at 10 years, it sounded like, and then switched it to 5. There had to have been a reason why they started at 10. My comment there would be that 5 years is a pretty short window for a company. A multi-billion-dollar company can go from being financial solvent
to not being financial solvent in not very much time, depending on markets and management and other issues. And I don't know that 5 years, that allows actually for some manipulation as far as Chapter 11s and different things. I would be more comfortable if that was a couple of years longer. That seems to be a better long-range plan for both the state of Wyoming and the mines themselves. I think most of these CEOs know what they're doing, and they probably, within 5 years, they kind of know where they're headed. 7 just allows a little more protection for the state. And like I said, the DEQ started at 10. They must have had a reason for that. So, I mean, I'm not going to push on that unless the rest of the council is in agreement. But I think it does bear some thought. Thanks.
Was that 5 years? It's my understanding that was an industry request.
Hearings Officer Balmer, we started at 10, and that was based on some looks at other states and their best practices. And industry came back with some arguments at 5. We weren't hard set on a number. We felt that we could live with 5, so we made that accommodation. If this council desires a change in that number, we are certainly not hard set to a number.
Dr. Bagley, any questions or comments?
I'll save my comments for later. At this point, I just want to state that I think DEQ has really been thorough in this and done a good job in getting public comment as they've developed this. But I don't have any questions at this point.
Right, Chair Lally, any questions?
Yeah. Excuse me. How many other states allow self-bonding, and I guess are their rules similar to the ones we're writing or more similar to what we already have? Just for an idea.
Hearing Officer Balmer and Madam Chair Lawley, I don't know that do you know the number offhand? I think it's 5, but I'm not.
Subject to check.
Yeah, it would be subject to verification, but I believe it's 5 other states provide self-bonding.
Okay.
And Wyoming would be the first state making this type of transition in updating their financial rules for financial assurance. The other states generally still hold the ratios option, and where we're moving more to a credit rating based system.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I was going to have a question of you, Kimber, but then I read the advisory board transcripts from both hearings, and I thought you did a really good job explaining how the whole credit ratings thing is developed and the significance of that as a piece of this whole financial assurance thing. So I thought that was very well done. I thought the question was good from the advisory board member, and the response was really good. I think you guys really did some comprehensive good work here. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
And I don't have any other questions. Any other questions from council members for Kyle or Kimber? Okay, I don't hear any. So with that, I think we can, at this time, we can go into the public comments. And not just see from the people in the audience by a show of hands, how many of you would like to come up and speak? 1, 2. Just 2? Okay. All right. Shannon, you want to come up first? Here's a sign-up sheet that's on the podium. If you please sign in and state your name. And if either of you are going to read your comments, I just ask that you do so slowly for court reporter's sake, okay?
Great, thank you. Chairman Lally and council members, thank you for the opportunity to come and speak in favor of DEQ's proposed financial assurance regulations. Our organization, through myself and other members of our staff and board, have been involved in this rulemaking proposal for over a year and a half, since June 2017. I can tell you from personal experience that this rule has been thoroughly vetted and discussed in both open public forums before the Land Quality Advisory Board and through informal stakeholder engagement led by DEQ. The comments raised by coal companies today are not new comments, and they have been appropriately considered and rejected by DEQ, in some cases several times over. What is also not new is the need for these rules to move forward. The current set of regulations was supposed to grant the privilege of self-bonding only to companies with ongoing financial health demonstrated at reasonable intervals. However, as the U.S. Government Accountability Office recently confirmed in an audit last year, current regulations make it difficult for a regulator to truly determine whether a coal company is strong enough to honor its self-bonding commitments. Additionally, even if a company appears stable at one point in time, its condition may change quickly given the complexity and rapidly changing dynamics of energy markets today. By the time a regulator decides that a coal company should no longer qualify for self-bonding under the current criteria, it may be too late to require the company to replace its self-bonds with real bonds issued by a financially strong third party. And if the company ultimately is forced to file bankruptcy, the situation gets worse. Since self-bonds aren't tied to any security, they risk being treated like all other general unsecured debts and getting paid very little or nothing in the bankruptcy process. With smaller and potentially riskier operators coming into Wyoming, and with the coal industry continuing to contract nationwide, now is the time to place appropriate safeguards on self-bonding in our rules to make sure Wyoming is never placed in a position of having to foot even $1 of reclamation costs. DEQ's proposed standards are a necessary and important step toward achieving this goal. It will end by reinforcing that self-bonding is a privilege, not a right, under federal and state coal mining laws. In fact, our neighboring state to the north outlaws self-bonding altogether, and our neighboring state to the south is in the process of phasing it out. Coal company claims of regulatory takings or of Wyoming losing its competitive advantage are simply unfounded. On behalf of our members throughout Wyoming, I hope you adopt DEQ's proposed rules today to move them forward in the rulemaking process.
All right, thanks, Shannon. Questions from the council? Chair Lally, any questions? Jane, any questions?
No.
Tim?
No,
Dr. Bagley?
no questions.
And I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you so
Shannon.
much.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
My name is Connie Wilbert, and I am here on behalf of Sierra Club Wyoming chapter. I am the director of the Wyoming chapter, and thank you very much for the opportunity to just share a very few, very brief comments. I'll start by basically endorsing the comments that Shannon just provided from the Powder River Basin Resource Council. They essentially say everything that I would say, and I'm not in the least bit inclined to repeat all that. I would say that we actually wish that Wyoming would move towards joining the ranks of most other states that do not allow a self-bonding altogether. But we're not there yet. We're not ready to take that step. We understand that. And in the meantime, right now, we strongly support adopting these proposed changes as basically a common sense and reasonable approach to reducing risk to the state of Wyoming and the residents of Wyoming for all the reasons that have been explained. So I'll just leave it at that. On behalf of our more than 5,000 members and supporters across the state of Wyoming, who are all Wyoming residents, we would urge you to adopt these changes to the rules today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Connie. Let me see if anyone has any questions for you, okay?
Mhm.
Dr. Bagley?
No questions?
Tim?
No.
Shane?
No, I don't.
Chair Lally? Thank you very much. All right. Do we have anyone out there that would like to make a comment in opposition to these rules? Okay, I don't see anyone out there. How about anyone that would like to make a comment that's in a neutral capacity? All right. DEQ, did you have any further remarks that you would like to make before we close?
Hearing Officer Bomber, no, we do not.
Council members, any last questions for Amber or Kyle? Not hearing any. So with that, I will close the hearing. This time, do I have a motion to approve the bill package, the statement as presented, and authorize the hearing officer?
So move.
Second?
Been moved and Dr. Bagley seconded. Have any comments before I call for the vote? Chair Lally? Please.
I am going to be voting on favor of the rule package. Recently, the problems in the coal industry have shown us that things can go downhill really fast, and I think it's important that the state's well protected. Oil and gas doesn't get this opportunity, and I think the mining company should be grateful for it. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. Bagley?
Yeah, I've got a couple comments. You know, to me, the idea, the theory of self-bonding, sounds good. You know, a company shows that it's financially solid, it can take care of this themselves, and I can see why it was put into the original federal law as an option, as a possibility, but not a right, as it has been said. And then there's what happens in the real world, and we saw that a couple of years ago, when companies that, some of the largest coal companies in the world, certainly in the country, all of a sudden are declaring bankruptcy. And the state is left with an enormous potential risk. And the bankruptcy court basically assigned hardly any. I mean, maybe at most 10% of the reclamation liability was going to get picked up if those companies just folded completely. Unfortunately, most of them, at least two of them, came back out of bankruptcy and are continuing to work. But it just happened so quick. And then some of the things that have changed since '83, and it was really interesting to see that original Federal Register discussion from then. You know, things, the financial markets have just changed tremendously, and the opportunities for companies to borrow against lines of credit that nobody knows about. There's just, the risk has gotten just too great for the state to allow self-bonding as was allowed. So I've actually personally, philosophically come to the conclusion that self-bonding shouldn't be allowed at all. The risk is just too great. However, I'm going to vote for the proposal because I think the DEQ has done a really thoughtful and thorough job in putting together a whole suite of bonding opportunities. So it's not just all self-bonding, which it shouldn't be, but they've capped it at 75%. You know, me personally, I think lower is better, but I could live with 75%. They've moved to credit rankings, which we also know have their limitations. We only have to go back about 11 years to see what happens when those agencies make mistakes. But it's a way to help the state reduce its risk if these companies just cannot meet their reclamation. And so it's been a long haul, and you know, we read about this in the newspaper every time the DEQ was meeting on this, you know, and lots of back and forth. I think they've done a good job of balancing, you know, where some of us might like to see versus where maybe we need to be right now. So I will be voting in favor of the motion. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bagley. Tim, do you have any comments?
No, nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay, and Shane?
I would just echo what's been said before, and I plan to vote aye on this, and believe, you know, this is in the best interest of the state. So that's what I have.
Okay, thank you. I would just state that I think the rules are real appropriate balance.
Thank you, Hearing Officer Blomner.
So at this time, I'll do a roll call vote. Dr. Lally? Aye. Dr. Bagley?
Aye.
Tim?
Aye.
Shane?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. So, carries. And I guess at this point, I get to gavel over to you, Chair Lally. Okay.
Thank you, council members. Is there any other further business to come before the council? Seeing none, the next meeting of the council is currently scheduled for May 14th and 15th. Sorry.
We have to approve minutes.
We did it
Oh,
at the beginning of the meeting.
was I here?
We may have a telephonic meeting before then to approve orders in a couple contested cases, and I'll keep in touch with you about that. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Move to adjourn.
I have a second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Bye, guys, on the phone.
All right. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
No,
have the
for
sticker.
the right, for the
Greg's
right
bringing
price,
them.